on the hands of a devil who is Putin, on the Herod hands. So first of all, we need real sanctions against Russian Federation. Stop buying Russian oil and gas. Russian oil and gas is full of Ukrainian blood. If you pay 800 million euros per day for Russian fossil fuel, and first country is Germany, then Putin can afford this war forever. And at 1:30 we will have a public signing here near the hemicycle. I invite all of you to do this. Second, we need weapons. Weapons and again weapons. And don't make this hypocrisy. Oh, this is defensive weapon, this is attacking weapon. We are defending our country. All weapons for us are defensive weapons and nothing else. And the last thing, I'm finishing. Just support Ukraine on our European path. If we are good enough to die for European values, maybe we are good enough to be part of European political family too. Stop lecturing us, start helping us. Stand together, shoulder to shoulder, and we stop this evil. If we will not do this, he will go further. And you will also miss the sound of plane with sound of missile. I don't want this. Let's stop it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexei. I granted you some extra time because of the fact that you just arrived from Ukraine and could update us. Now, next in the debate, la prochaine orateur.
Our next speaker on behalf of the ALDE group is Mr. Jacques Maire from France. Jacques, you have the floor. Thank you, President, colleagues. I'm very happy to be speaking after Alexei Goncharenko because I think he's really made it clear where we are today. Thank you, Frank, for your report. We have not been inactive. We have done things. We expelled Russia. We, Frank, Tini and myself, went to visit Ukraine. But nonetheless, despite all that we have done, we are facing a very difficult reality here in Strasbourg, and it's a much too bureaucratic reality. I'm going to be quite honest about that. Over the past 2 months, European states have had to look again at what they're doing, look again at their mandates, do things they didn't do in the past, things like military support. I know that's not our topic here, but many countries have had to rethink what they're about. People have gone to visit Ukraine. And after all, Ukraine is a member of our organization, and yet 62 days after the beginning of the conflict, we are not sufficiently present in Ukraine in terms of our political decision makers within this organization, in terms of the Bureau. It's all very well to talk about visibility. It's all very well to talk about respecting the rules. But we now have to really think outside the box in terms of what we're doing. Think about what happened yesterday. To the request we put to the Bureau. We were told that our office in Kiev would reopen only once an appropriate action plan had been adopted. That's just much too much red tape. When we're told the Human Rights Commissioner can't go to Ukraine because the conditions of the exercise of her mandate do not allow her to go, again, that's a bureaucratic response. It's up to us to do something. We are a law-based, a rules-based organization, but sometimes you have to look at who you are and you have to reinvent yourself. We have our report on Ukraine. We have our political support for Ukraine, yes, but there's something else that's very important. And here I thank Frank for making this point, and that is support for opposition movements in Belarus and in Russia. Here again, we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to think about what we can do. Apart from an incident with Greece in the past, this is the first time that we've had a chance to recognize that civil society and working with civil society is just as important as a relationship with a government, especially a government that's left us and that is an aggressor. So, if this tragedy is going to teach us anything at all, it is that we have to be more relevant, more present, and we have to do more. Yes, I think the Assembly has played its role, but I do think there's one important area that we're not saying enough about in this report. The Assembly, the Committee of Ministers, the Secretary-General, I think they have to work better together and more strongly together to make the Council of Europe more dynamic and to think again about how it works. Thank you.
Now in the debate I call Madam Suna Ivarsdottir from Iceland. Suna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Mr. Frank Schwabe for this comprehensive report about what the Council of Europe can do to show solidarity with Ukraine, but also where we are moving forward after this reprehensible and completely unjustifiable invasion of the Russian Federation into the territory of Ukraine. First of all, I would like to express my utmost support to the idea that the Council of Europe does everything in its power to support the constitution of an international criminal tribunal in order to try the crime of aggression, which we know we cannot adequately address through the ICC procedure. I would also like to call on all member states to support the ICC in its investigations of the heinous war crimes that we hear are happening in the territory of Ukraine. And I would like to draw specific attention to the crime of rape used as a weapon of war in Ukraine, which is something that needs a special type of investigation and special attention from all of us to address. I would also like to say that we should show strong support for this report. It has comprehensive action plans on what we as an organization have competences to do to support Ukraine. And I think we should use all of our competences and all of our tools to assist Ukraine and to show solidarity with them. Having said that, I also think that it is important that we try to reach out to those in Russia that will speak for peace and those in Russia that name the war a war. And because of this, I must mention a specific case of Vladimir Kara-Murza, an opposition politician who just testified before the Legal Affairs Committee April 4th about the bleak situation of opposition in Russia, of those speaking against the war, of those trying to stop the war. He was arrested. He is now on trial, likely to be convicted and sentenced to up to 10 or 15 years imprisonment for calling the war a war. At his testimony before our committee, when asked what can we do to support the opposition in Russia, those who speak against the war, he said, give a VPN connection free to all Russians. I think this is something that we should consider, that Russians who oppose Putin and his regime can safely access the internet, can safely exchange information, and can hopefully safely organize a different kind of regime in Russia, which will bring us peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Suna. Now I welcome in the debate from Ukraine, Madam Maria Mezentseva. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear President. As always, an unprepared speech. You know, when I was with my colleagues in Kharkiv on the rocket cassette missiles just before coming to see here you, dear colleagues, my only thought was, well, God, please, not now. We have to deliver this speech. We have to be as a delegation here and to vote on this resolution. And that's really random to have these thoughts at the moment when you are under the rockets. But these thoughts are really something that touches upon every family and every displaced person, every displaced child in Ukraine, when they are in search of food and water, as it was literally like in the Stone Age. In February, they were drinking melted water in Mariupol. Now they are eating cat and dog food in Mariupol and drinking the water from the toilet sink. I am very sorry to give you these examples, but this is something very truthful which people in the 21st century are facing. Yes, we are not a military organization, but I'm highly thankful for the amendment which would stop supplying weapons, and we call for that, the stop supplying weapons for Russia and the components of Russia, because the tanks being and having fuel in them are proceeding with bloody missions to innocent Ukrainians. Colleagues, we cut the head of the snake, but the tail is still there. I have to address the issue of the Russian staff, which is working at a very high-ranking position here and influencing the political decisions. Well, food security. I think you've seen in your member states how prices have grown, and the food security is one of the things we have to face. Yesterday, just 32 years ago, the whole world faced a catastrophe of Chernobyl. Well, we might have 15 Chernobyls in the future, because the 15 nuclear power reactors are still active in Ukraine. And Putin doesn't have to press the red button. He can just, by accident, drop a missile in one of those. Colleagues, you are great politicians and great international lawyers. So please stop calling this a conflict. This is a war of aggression. It is written in our previous resolution. Colleagues, we have liberated some of those who are trapped by Russians, and one of them is Mr. Ivan Fedorov, the legal mayor of the Melitopol. But there is more than 30 persons like that right now being captured by Russians. I call you to liberate them all as well. 3 minutes, it's not enough. We, with very hard thoughts and heart, are here with you, and we're thankful for the timely response. But we need to act on national levels. More sanctions, more weapons, more solidarity. And I thank to every person from your country, from the 45 member states who support Ukraine today, who became Ukrainians themselves. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Maria. And indeed, 3 minutes is not enough. But fortunately, we have more of you colleagues later on the speakers list, so we will hear directly from Ukraine later. Next in the debate is Mr. Richard Keane from the United Kingdom. He should be online. Do we have connection with him? We don't have. Then we go to le prochain orateur.
So the next speaker is Mr. Claude Kern from France. You have the floor. Thank you, President. I would like to begin by thanking our colleague Frank Schwabe. I thank him for his report on the consequences of the Russian Federation's aggression against Ukraine. These consequences can be seen clearly in Ukraine today. We see destruction, we see migrants fleeing war, and we see unrelenting barbarity. We also see the consequences in neighbouring countries, the countries that are receiving refugees, Poland and Slovakia in particular. But we don't yet fully realise all the possible consequences of this war for member states of the Council of Europe. Yesterday, in a reply to Alexander Pojciech, the Secretary-General of the Council of Europe shared fears about the potential destabilisation of Moldova because of Russian troops stationed in Transnistria. I can only share those fears, and sadly they're already being confirmed. Similarly, I have concerns about the situation in the Balkans or in Georgia, and we'll have an opportunity of talking about that tomorrow. Our member states have shown unity. They have reaffirmed the humanist values of Europe, and they have expelled Russia from the Council of Europe. That had to be done. But we now need to maintain that unity for the long term, given efforts to destabilise our situation, and there will be such efforts. Let's not kid ourselves. The job will not always be easy. It is my hope that the parliamentary debate within our Assembly will make unity more likely. We have to be clear, and I thank our colleague Frank Schwabe for stating this in his report. The Council of Europe must fully and rapidly assist Ukraine, but within the framework of its mandate. We don't want to get involved in any defence issues, but we want to give all of the support required to the Ukrainian authorities. Support must also be given to the authorities in other destabilised member states on issues like the protection of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. We must be ready to think new thoughts, to think about how we can do things in new ways when that is necessary. And this is the point that Jacques Maire was making. And we also must cut red tape. I wish in that regard to commend the rapid action undertaken by the Council of Europe's Development Bank, the first development bank to grant money to assist members to respond to the immediate needs of Ukrainian refugees. In particular, they provided help with transport, shelter, food and medical care. It seems to me essential that we coordinate properly with other multilateral bodies, foremost among them the OSCE. Lastly, and this is something that we will debate in greater depth tomorrow, we must collectively rethink Europe's multilateral architecture in order to preserve peace and stability in Europe. The prospect of having a summit of heads of state and government of the Council of Europe is something that I believe to be necessary. Thank you. Thank you, Claude.
I call Madam Emin Nur Güney from Turkey. Emin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Dear President, dear colleagues, to begin with, I would like to congratulate the rapporteur, Mr. Schwab, for preparing a detailed report. Of course, our priority now is to support Ukraine and Ukrainian people by putting emphasis on their urgent needs stemming from this unlawful and devastating war. We hope that first a ceasefire and then a peace can be achieved soon to prevent further bloodshed and destruction. In my speech, rather than focusing on Ukraine, I would like to advert to some general aspects of the current situation. The report touches upon large area of the consequences of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We should mind that these are not just short-term consequences. We need to find solutions urgently. There are also many long-term challenges we should tackle to discuss thoroughly. It is clear that we are now in an opposite direction of the peaceful spirit set out in the first period after the Cold War. The security landscape of Europe has rapidly changed, and a new Iron Curtain, a dividing line in Europe, re-emerged. In this hostile environment, our common goal to achieve democratic security is also under the threat of resurgence of aggressive nationalism, intolerance, and undemocratic tendencies, as well as a lack of effective multilateralism combined with serious challenges in recent decades. The erosion of the European security architecture will inevitably have repercussions on the whole of Europe. Against the exceptional threat of the Russian aggression, the European community was able to create a united front. But as we see in the past, we have prone to shift our priorities and turn our attention inward once a crisis is over. Therefore, the important thing is we should also find a way to sustain this unity and avoid divisions on our future actions. Moreover, we should pay attention to set aside to responding all these challenges only at the level of discourse, rather than we should adopt concerted actions. To that end, we should discuss constructively on how to strengthen respective roles and competences of international organizations, particularly the Council of Europe. As expressed in the report, we should formulate a new vision for Europe. I believe such a vision needs to be constructed around the notion that our security, well-being, and prosperity is interdependent, and that we will progress and regress all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Emin. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Titus Kolatian from Romania. Titus, you have the floor.
Thank you, President and colleagues. First of all, I would like to express a word of respect for our Ukrainian colleagues, women and men, for their courage and the way how they fight and support the interest of their country and their nations. Secondly, I want to express a clear and strong support for the adoption of the report proposed by our rapporteur, Frank Schwab. This report, while expressing once again the support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the independent status of Ukraine, and we should repeat again and again this important formula in international relations, this report is also expressing a strong call for unity. I underline unity in supporting Ukraine and exerting the maximum pressure on Russia to cease this aggression. By the way, yesterday the Romanian Prime Minister, the Speaker of the Parliament and the Foreign Minister paid a visit in Kiev, meeting President Zelensky and the Ukrainian Prime Minister, discussing what was supposed to be discussed between neighbors and the European partners, but also looking forward beyond this period of horrible aggression, looking forward how to accelerate the speed of European integration of Ukraine, and also looking at the future process of reconstructing the building of the new Ukraine. And we are very confident that in European Ukraine, also the identity of Ukrainian citizens belonging to different other ethnical identities, this is the case of the loyal Romanian Ukrainian citizens, will be preserved according to the standards. Thirdly, the rapporteur is right when mentioning the risk, and this is paragraph 9, the first line, a risk of an escalation and or enlargement of the conflict that cannot be excluded. I will join the Claude Kern signaling with great concern the last developments which are happening in Transnistria, and we are looking with great concern on the provocative actions of Russian inspiration in Transnistria, and we are looking with concern but with also great support for the territorial integrity and sovereignty, and also for the European future of the Republic of Moldova, and I will add also Georgia, of course. Last but not least, it's an appeal for unity within this assembly. I mean, the unity that was shown when adopting our opinion number 300 for expelling Russia from this organization should be preserved. Despite nuances and so on, at the end, at the final vote, we should preserve this political unity, which is essential for our force and for our efficiency when establishing our ways of doing things and supporting Ukraine. Also in supporting the organization of the 4th summit, and also working through legal means for the international criminal justice that should be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Titus.
The next speaker is Mr. Bernard Fournier for France. Bernard, you have the floor. Mr. President, dear colleagues, it's been 2 months since the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine. 2 months since the president of Russia has been trampling underfoot the values of peace on which our continent has been built. For 2 months, the Russian Federation has been breaking every day the rules of international humanitarian law. For 2 months, there has been destruction, suffering, and exactions. Against this situation, the Council of Europe has taken a clear and rapid position. Our Assembly did not falter. It reaffirmed unanimously our values and drew the necessary consequences. This was necessary, but very much remains to be done, given the seriousness of the situation for Ukraine, but also for Europe as a whole. We can only be worried and concerned when we hear the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs mention the possibility of a third world war. In this context, all member states of our organization have a serious responsibility to bring appropriate assistance to Ukraine and to reduce the human cost of this war, but also to bring pressure to bear on Russia. Let us be clear. It will be even easier to bring this pressure to bear if we are not dependent on Russia, especially energetically, as the draft resolution which is submitted to us emphasizes. This brings us to another framework, and in particular that of the European Union, the subject of strategic autonomy. We were too naive in the past, and not only concerning Russia. The defense of our values, the defense of our democratic model, suppose that we cannot be submitted to energetic, food, or technological constraints. But very much remains to be done. Much remains to be done so as to face the migratory consequences of this crisis and to give a proper welcome to migrants. Much must be done also to document the violations of international humanitarian law And I am pleased by the support given by the Council of Europe to the General Prosecutor of Ukraine. There's also much to be done to rethink the role of the Council of Europe in such a context. I wish in particular to support the request of our rapporteur so that a fourth summit of heads of state and government of the member states of the Council of Europe may happen soon. We must, of course, let this subject mature, and the debate within our assembly will contribute to this. But this seems to me something that is absolutely indispensable. Thank you very much.
Merci à vous,
Thank you, dear Bernard.
Mr. Max Lux. Max, you have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, on the 15th of March of this year, in our Parliamentary Assembly, we decided that Russia must be excluded from the Council of Europe. This is not news to anyone here, but unfortunately does show what has happened in European public opinion. How good the Kremlin's propaganda is, how good Russian propaganda is, how good the Putin system is working in Europe. And the result, what we see in public opinion, is that Russia left under its own free will, and of course that is false. And I think that it's important that we here in this Parliamentary Assembly make it clear in our member states that we haven't simply waited for Russia to leave, but rather that we acted decisively to be on the side of Ukraine. For us, as Germans, perhaps another example of Kremlin propaganda is often seen, the historical responsibility of Germany to the Soviet Union. My country had once upon a time left all of Europe in ruins and ashes. But I also know that as a German person, that most of the victims in the Soviet Union, victims of the Soviet Union of my country's action were mostly on Ukrainian soil. And I think it is also important for my country in this time, and particularly in Ukraine, to show how this brutal Russian aggression is taking place. And for me, as a member of the German parliament, on the Green side, I will vote tomorrow to give greater weapon support to Russia. Sorry, to Ukraine against Russia, to Ukraine against Russia. In spite of all of this, I would like to thank Frank Schwab for his excellent report, because it shows that we, as the Council of Europe, are taking our responsibility. It's not going to end with Russia's exclusion, but rather we are going to actively embrace that support and that responsibility now, that we will have to investigate and document human rights offenses in the context of this frightful and fearful war, and that we will have to strengthen the role of civil society. It will also show that in Russia and in Belarus, opposition movements will also have an important role to play, and we must not leave them alone. Russia wasn't simply playing an underhanded game. We were not simply too naive. I think Europe was too ignorant, and it is on our side to be on Ukraine's side. Thank you very much.
I call from Lithuania, Mr. Emanuelis Sinkeras. Emanuelis, you have the floor.
Danke, liebe Kollegen. Danke, Max, was hast du gesagt?
Thanks, dear colleagues. Thanks, Max, for what you had to say about the responsibility of the Federal Republic of Germany and the reconciliation that has taken place over the last decades. The developments in the German society, who was responsible for the Second World War and for the Holocaust. But I believe that German society and the German government we see today, we are waiting for yet another step to be taken. Further comments to the Russian government. When the Russian government talks about denazification of Ukraine, no one on the German side, and even our dear Israeli friends, must also emphasize that the so-called denazification or new mass murder in Ukraine is being undertaken by Russia, and this is happening in relation to an internal scene in Russia that has been subject to horrible movements, horrible racist ideology, and we must take this new ideology, Ruski Mir, in Russia, and discuss this. Thank you, Frank, for your inclusivity when you talked about your 25 amendments and you took on board 20 of them. But in other reports as well, excellent report, which we'll be seeing tomorrow on Thursday, the report on Patrick as well. We have to emphasize that this Russian ideology is part of Ruski Mir and this priority to ethnicity over human rights, Russians over human rights. Russians have higher priority, and this is something that we have heard from this society. And my grandmother and my mother survived 4 years in Nazi concentration camps, and this we've been hearing over and over again. This über alles is something that we have to bring to an end. And here, when I talk about this on behalf of all survivors of the Second World War, Putin has no right to talk about victims of the Second World War because he's not representing the right side here. Ukraine has fought against Nazis. And today, when we see the evacuation of survivors of the Second World War toward the Federal Republic of Germany, the last survivors of the Second World War, we have to have something to say about this ideology. Ukraine wants to be free, dear colleagues, and all countries must help Ukraine militarily to be free. But Russia is stuck on its own ideology, and that ideology must be put an end to. This ideology of Ruski Mir cannot live further in Russia. Thank you very much, Emmanuel.
In the debate, Mr. Erkan Gadiri from Azerbaijan. Erkan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, various international crimes are being committed on the territory of Ukraine. Crimes against humanity, war crimes, And based on what was reported from Bucha, Irpin, and other places, it is fair to say that there is a reason to believe that some of those crimes are of genocidal nature. But above all that, there is one particular crime which deserves special attention, and that is a crime of aggression. Dear colleagues, there are two categories of international crimes: crimes according to international law and crimes against international law. The vast majority of international crimes belong to the first group. Those are the ones which are defined by relevant international treaties. Terrorism, illegal use of certain weapons, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and so on and so on. Those are crimes according to international law. Aggression is a crime of its own kind. It is not a crime according to international law. It is a crime against international law. It's based on fundamental denial of international law as a legal phenomenon. It is one thing when one is frustrated by ineffectiveness of international law, and we all know that international law is far from being perfect, is in fact very weak, often abused by powerful states. But it is quite another thing when one denies the legal nature of international law. There is a word in the Russian language, безнаказанность. It is translated into English as impunity. It is a correct translation, but some portion of the meaning is missing here. Impunity implies that either there is no legally provided punishment, or there is a legally provided punishment, but someone manages to escape it, or for some reason is excluded from it. Russian word безнаказанность, apart from that, also means that there can in principle be no punishment, either in the law or in morality or even in the eyes of public opinion. And that is why we often hear from Russian politicians phrases like, we will bomb Warsaw, our tanks will be in Prague again, Berlin will beg us, Baltic states are fake, Ukraine never existed, and so on and so on. And one of them, namely Mikhail Delegin, member of the State Duma, lower house of the Russian Federal Parliament, went as far as to say that Russia could and perhaps even should use tactical nuclear weapon against Azerbaijan. Guess why? Because Azerbaijan provides humanitarian aid for Ukraine. Such words should not come this easy. And we are at the stage where international law is being denied its legal nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moi, je donne maintenant la parole à Madame Tris.
I now give the floor to Madame Tries.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President, Rapporteur, colleagues. Today, I feel especially proud to be European, to be here. And I feel that pride when I listen to what you're saying, no matter where you come from. On the 24th of February, Russia did something unthinkable. By illegally entering Ukraine, they brought barbarity back to our continent. The massacre in Bucha is sadly just one illustration. The martyrdom of Mariupol is another. Russia has reintroduced a relationship based on force, based on strength, and it's threatening our whole continent and even beyond our continent in nuclear and ballistic terms. We have strongly and unanimously condemned what has happened. The Russian Federation is no longer part of this organization, and that is a good thing. But I think that the Council of Europe can and should do more at several levels. War crimes? Yes, of course there are war crimes. Unlimited attacks on civilians, indiscriminate bombing, murders, pillage, rape. All of these things leave no doubt about war crimes. Crimes against humanity? Yes, probably, but we'll have to wait until the end of the investigation before we can say that for sure. And indeed, our organisation must ensure that investigations are not hindered. Genocide. As the French president has said, genocide means something. It's a legal term. Once again, I think that our organisation, through the European Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, has a role to play. Of course, we're going to be talking about this for years, sadly. There will be investigations, trials, reparations, discussions. As the Council of Europe, we need to be stronger than ever in defending democracy, and we must not accept any kind of move towards pseudo-illiberal democracies. Like many others, I believe that the Council of Europe needs to do more, to be more proactive, to respond more strongly also to what has happened. We need to put an end to this war as quickly as possible, respecting the principle of territorial integrity as recognized by the UN and the principle of sovereignty. Ukraine's territorial integrity is not up for negotiation, nor are its democratic choices. But we do need to discuss what is happening. We need to keep channels with Moscow open. But alongside that, we need a strong sanction-based policy. And we need to help Ukraine in every possible way. There is no alternative to all of that. Any proposals to help us achieve these goals are, of course, welcome. Thank you again, Frank, for this report. It's a comprehensive report, and it shows the Council of Europe what it can do moving forward as we try to be as effective, as united, and stand in as much solidarity as ever.
To Mr. Ahmed Yildiz from Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, with this report, once again, we strongly condemn this aggression in the strongest term and express our solidarity with Ukraine and Ukrainian people fighting ferociously for their freedom and their independence. The continuation of this aggression served nothing but more death and destruction. In addition to indiscriminate attacks on urban areas, civilian infrastructure, and even innocent civilians, we have witnessed shameful scenes which amounts to war crimes and crimes against humanity from various districts around Kyiv, the capital. Targeting innocent civilians can never be accepted. Identifying those who are responsible and bringing them to justice by holding an independent investigation should be our expectation. Despite some progress, we see some setbacks on the negotiations in recent weeks. Nonetheless, we still hope that the negotiations will reach a success. In this respect, we call on Russian Federation to stop the aggression and get back to the negotiating table with goodwill. To that end, Turkey has been making every effort to open the way for peace. We will continue to keep dialogue channels open and engage with both countries, including our offer to host a meeting of the two leaders when this will be realistic. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, as proposed by the rapporteur, organizing a summit of our organization is a very timely and good idea. If we achieve a successful summit, it will contribute a lot to our continent and will be remembered in the future by next generations. On the financial issue, I still urge, I repeat here, that let's make a fair distribution of the financial gap. Voluntary contributions may look good idea in a parliamentary atmosphere, but when we take into consideration the totality of the Council of Europe dealing with the rule of law, CPT, others, the voluntary contribution cannot be a permanent solution because it may hamper the sustainability and integrity of some chambers of this organization. I blame some words here that compare Turkish operation in Iraq, terror operation, with the Russian aggression on Ukraine. This operation, Turkish operation in Iraq, is on a region that is not controlled by Iraqi government nor by the regional Kurdish authority. That's why Iraqi army also moved to the same region in coordination with the Kurdish regional authority in Iraq. So it is not an arbitrary operation. Then, Madam Chair, I disagree with the...
Could you please come to an end, because we have to be quite strict.
Okay, then as Madam Mijatovic yesterday declared here, the way to communicate with between the Council and my country is to engage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have to be, dear colleagues, we have to be very strict because we have a huge speakers list. And if you want to give everybody a chance, then we have to do so. I give the floor now to Kimmo Kiljunen.
Madam President, Frank Schwabe, thanks very much for your excellent report. We can fully share it together with us here now. Thanks very much, Maria and Alexei from Ukraine. Excellent presentation from your side too. You gave us severe messages from your country. We in Finland, we are in full solidarity with you. In our living memory is very, very well year 1939, when after Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Stalin attacked to Finland. We were alone. Stalin calculated that Finland is divided because severe civil war had taken place in the country 20 years back. But what Red Army actually met in Finland? Red Army met miracle of winter war in Finland. The whole country was united. The nationhood showed its strength. And Maria and Oleksiy, that's exactly now happening in Ukraine too. Your national identity is the highest level in your history as far as I can analyze it. Congratulations partly for that one. Tragedy is huge, but you will obviously win. Russians are saying that the problem is the NATO expansion. That's a threat for them, as they say it. No, that's not the threat. The major threat is Europeanization of Ukraine. the democracy development in your country. That is the threat, but not against Russia itself, not against Russian people, but against the authoritarian power structures in Russia. That is the threat. And that's why your fight in Ukraine is not only a fight for your own nationhood, but it's a fight for democracy in Russia too. And that we should remember what is actually going on. And that's very important to understand that the common security in Europe has now changed to common unsecurity. And that's why we are in fully solidarity. Thanks, Frank, for your report in noting that we should also remember the civic society in Russia. We shouldn't isolate the people of Russia from this, particularly the brave human rights fighters in Russia, that we should always give the strong support and links. What is left for Russia now? Putin's time is over sooner or even sooner. That's absolutely clear. But what is left for Russia? Apologies. Apologies for Ukrainian people, apologies for the whole world, and actually apologies also for Russian people themselves. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mrs. Laima Andrikiene from Blue2NE.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Schwabe, thank you for your excellent report on the consequences of the continued Russian Federation's aggression against Ukraine and the role and response of the Council of Europe. Colleagues, Russian Federation is out of the Council of Europe. It is out of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. This House unanimously condemned Russia's war of aggression, breaches of the international law, and Russia's international commitments. But it is only a beginning. We welcome the United Nations General Assembly resolution of the 7th of April on suspension of the rights of the membership of the Russian Federation in the Human Rights Council. To my mind, to my understanding, there should be no place for aggressive Russia in the United Nations Security Council. Colleagues, we are witnessing brutal atrocities, war crimes committed by the Russian army in the occupied territories of Ukraine, Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol. We can say the genocide of Ukrainian people. Those responsible should face justice. An international criminal court is already dealing with those issues. I fully support the idea that special international criminal tribunal has to be established, and we have to finish with the ideology of Putinism, which is very similar to Stalinism and fascism, once and forever. We have to exert pressure on the withdrawal of Russian troops from the sovereign territories, not only of Ukraine, but also Georgia, Moldova, and Belarus. And we shouldn't forget about this when our eyes are on Ukraine mostly. And last but not least, our assistance to Ukraine must be much stronger. I'm sure we can do more. We are expressing our support in Mr. Schwabe's report. We are expressing our support for the establishment of Ukraine's Solidarity Trust Fund to rebuild Ukraine after the war, to initiate a large-scale investment program, and to restore the country's growth potential after the war. While now, when the Ukrainians are fighting for theirs and ours freedom and European values, we have to support them by all means possible, political, economic, humanitarian, and military. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Andrikiene. I call now Mr. Pringle, Thomas Pringle from Ireland.
The horrific invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation will have far-reaching effects across Europe and indeed the world. The continued aggression is shocking, and the harm being done to the civilian population of Ukraine is terrible. There is no doubt that the efforts of this Council must be to support the people of Ukraine and put whatever pressure we can on the government of the Russian Federation to end this aggression. But we should also not support the government of Ukraine in the banning of 8 political parties there as well. I think that is something that we have to stress. I believe that there is a need for some line of communication to be ready as well to push for a peaceful settlement of this conflict, and the Council of Europe should have a role in that. The Council of Europe can achieve this by keeping lines of communication open with the people of Russia. I think that it is important that those lines of communication, as outlined in the document, but aren't actually in the motion, should be kept open. Among the changes that the conflict is driving in Europe is the decision, apparently, of the Finnish and Swedish governments to ask to join NATO. There is some merit, perhaps, in their decision from their point of view, but it is not for me to comment on that. And it would be helpful if they did not comment on Ireland's discussions around the same topic. This will lead to even more pressure on Ireland to abandon our traditional stance of military neutrality, even though consistently over 70% of the Irish people have said that they do not want to change that policy when surveyed. But that does not seem to satisfy the warmongers in our own media, the government and possibly even the EU. I believe that the views of the Irish people need to be respected, and I would hope that the Council of Europe would respect and support that view as well, particularly with the upcoming Irish presidency of the Council. The idea that NATO is some great protection for the people of Europe, in my mind, is laughable. I believe that when the history of this conflict will be written, the role of NATO and the events that led up to it will be interesting to read. Although it might be the US and NATO that write that history, so maybe we will not see that. The attack on neutrality is matched with a demand and wish for Ireland to join NATO, or if not, at least join the EU version of NATO. To that end as well, I would also have concerns with the continued alignment of the Council of Europe with the EU. Could this organisation become a vassal of the EU? This question needs to be addressed and might be more a pressing argument considering the Russian aggression as well. The Russian aggression is having immediate, deadly effects on the people of Ukraine, but there can also be long-lasting effects across Europe, and we will see that work out in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I go now to Mr. Stefan Bergeron. He's online. If you succeed. No. Then we come back on him later. I give then the floor to Mr. John Howell. He's here.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I am unashamedly on the side of Ukraine. The speech which has moved me the most this morning has been that excellent speech of Oleg Goroshenko, amongst many other excellent speeches this morning. He spoke with sincerity and with clarity, and should have brought home to us what this war is about and what its effects are. I don't want to use faint praise to damn this report when I say that it contains many worthy items that we should concentrate on. Nor do I want to damn it with faint praise by saying that it is also well-meaning. But I know too that we are not a military organisation. But that does not mean that we can simply pretend that a war is not taking place and that it has nothing to do with us. We are asking in paragraph 11.2 of the motion for nations and organizations to help strengthen Ukrainian airspace. That means a no-fly zone. But we are not prepared to ask them, it would seem, to supply military assistance. Yes, it may be implicit. It may be implicit. But I feel that it should also be explicit. This is not a time, to use the English expression, to hide our light under a bushel when Ukraine is asking for weapons. This report deals with a number of items that are important. It deals with refugees. It deals with professional support. It deals with the full withdrawal of Russian troops, not just from Ukraine, but from Georgia, Moldova, and Belarus. And it also asks for an international criminal court to take action, and I hope that that will be unhindered. It also asks for us to engage with civil society. And let me say that as far as the Belarusian civil society is concerned, the most efficient organization that I've come across is one that has selected members of this assembly to be godparents for political prisoners in Belarus, and we met yesterday for a photograph to be able to send to those Belarusian prisoners. So on those grounds, I want to finish here, Madam President, and to say that I fully support Ukraine.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mr. Mogens Jensen, Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, in accept of giving most colleagues the possibility to talk, I will be short. I would like to thank our rapporteur for this report, which in itself, when adopted, is another and again confirmed clear signal to the warlord Putin that a unified Europe also in this assembly in strongest possible terms condemns the Russian Federation's aggression against Ukraine. We stand in solidarity with Ukraine and the brave Ukrainian people and underline our unwavering support for their sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. And we shall use all possible tools to stand up for Ukraine and against Putin. First of all, increased military assistance to Ukraine to help the Ukrainian people defend themselves and stop the war. Secondly, severe economic and energy sanctions. Thirdly, we have to supply all humanitarian aid needed. And fourthly, we have to make it crystal clear, also when it comes to cultural, sports and media interference with Russia, that we also here, in this moment, draw a red line. And finally, we have to step up solidarity with those member states which have received large numbers of people fleeing Ukraine, and we all have to secure all possible help for Ukrainian refugees. A unified response against Russia and in defense of Ukraine from this assembly is utmost important, and therefore I also urge you, all colleagues, to support the report from Frank Schwab and the Political Affairs Committee. Thank you very much.
Grand merci. On peut maintenant retourner sur...
Thank you very much. We, I'm pleased to say, now have our Canadian colleague online. Mr. Bergeron, you have the floor. Good morning, Madam. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Mr. Rapporteur. It is said that Stalin said that the death of one person is a tragedy, but the death of a million is a statistic. Fortunately, these figures have not been reached in Ukraine statistically. Nevertheless, we have witnessed atrocities which we cannot ignore. Civilians have been executed in cold blood in Bucha. We have seen what happened to Kramatorsk and other places. And in particular, we've seen the appalling violence against Mariupol and the fact that people are almost starving there now as a result. This war is unjustified and unjustifiable. And the fear is that this may not stop here. We met a delegation of courageous Ukrainian women parliamentarians in Ottawa recently, and they have asked us to do more, and we must do more. The Canadian Foreign Minister has addressed possible disagreements on individual topics, but essentially we agree fundamentally on the reaction which we must all have vis-à-vis this Russian invasion, whether we're talking about sanctions against the Russian Federation and help for Ukraine. Canada's response has been firm, but we can do more in terms of sanctions. And this is the reaction of most of Western states. It's vital that, for instance, sanctions such as the exclusion of the Russian Federation from SWIFT should be pursued. It's quite right that the oligarchs around the Russian president should be sanctioned. when he spoke to the Canadian Parliament, President Zelensky said to us, imagine what it's like to be Ukrainian at the moment. Imagine that your parliament is being bombed at this very moment. There are difficult decisions to be taken, but they must be taken. But we mustn't confuse the brutal government of President Putin with the Russian people. It is illegal action by the Russian president that has led to this. And I'm thinking of recent statements made by Russian opponents at the television recently, saying that they have been the victims of appalling propaganda. In difficult times such as we face, it is difficult to find the right words, but we must be absolutely tangible in our approach, and we must show that actions mean more than words. Thank you. Thank you very much.
To Mr. Joseph O'Reilly. Joe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I welcome this report and its contents. To say, first of all, that I, like so many colleagues here, stand in awe of our parliamentary colleagues from Ukraine. They've displayed extraordinary tenacity, extraordinary capacity to cope with huge stress and to absorb enormous suffering on their own part and the part of their people. And I certainly stand in awe of them. And not only do we stand in awe of them, but we should and do stand in solidarity with them. At national level, we should implement the sanctions as effectively as we can, not just effectively, completely. We should, and I'm very proud of my own country's response in this area, be a warm house, a warm place for people, displaced persons from Ukraine. The war is barbaric, it's illegal, it constitutes within it lots of war crimes, and they will have to be prosecuted. Now, I do think the distinction is important to be made that we are not condemning the Russian people or ordinary Russian individuals here. We are talking of a corrupt dictatorial regime, which indeed ordinary Russians suffer as much from as others. So I think we need to keep that, particularly in this assembly. I think it was correct and proper to expel Russia, and as I said in that debate, they expelled themselves by their actions. I think we, as a Council of Europe, should be ready to have a role not only, and I would appeal to the Council of Ministers, as the report suggests, to go on with assistance. But not only have we a role now, but we're going to have a role, and a very important role, I think, in attempting to broker a peace also. I think we have to be at the vanguard of efforts to broker a peace. And I do support Mr. Schwab and the report's suggestion of a summit of the leaders of our member states. I would be very in favour of that. In other words, I think we should, and particularly our Assembly, I'd appeal to President Cox, to the Secretary-General, to the Council of Ministers, that we as an Assembly, as an organisation, should be at the vanguard of efforts to achieve a peace and should not be a sideline observer of this, because there will have to be a peace. There will have to be a rebuilding of Ukraine. And of course, we have to be careful that the peace is not another version of the Versailles Agreement and that we don't sow the seeds of a Third World War there. But in essence, I want to stand in solidarity with Ukraine. I want to condemn the barbaric war. I want to say we've done the right thing so far. We have to go on doing the right thing. Thank you, Madam President.
Just in time. I call now for Mrs. Larisa Bilotsier from Ukraine. You have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, distinguished chair, first of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur, Frank Schwab, for enormous work and detailed, comprehensive report on consequences of the most cruel and horrible war in Ukraine. And special thanks to Frank Schwab that as a political group leader together with colleagues and PACE president visited Ukraine expressing the solidarity with the Ukrainian people at this very difficult time of war. PACE in Council of Europe has shown that it can invest political will to stop Russia. But seizing a membership of Russia in Council of Europe is a diplomatic act that will not stop Putin's war. And other frontiers that are outlined in this report must be overcome. Unfortunately, every money and support to Ukraine is less than European countries pay for Russian oil and gas. We need to close the door of financing Russian war in Ukraine. The dependence on Russian energy is not an accident. It's a consequence of wrong-headed policy in Europe. Of course, there must be a cost of such errors. Ukrainians are paying the highest price each day by thousands of lost lives, by 16,000 people missing, by 10,000 residential buildings destroyed, or on this scale, priceless human lives and petrol prices at gas stations, for example, in Germany. Russian harm to Ukraine economy as for today is tremendous, $600 billion. Russia launched 1,300 missiles at Ukraine. More and more Ukrainian infrastructure is being destroyed every day. This is economic terrorism of Russia. Can you imagine that 1,500 schools were destroyed? 215 children were killed. Horrendous atrocities are taking place in the heart of Europe, in Ukraine. For you to see the scale, I want to give you examples, documented testimonies of Ukrainians. In Irpin, 9-year-old girl was raped by 11. At least 11 sperm samples were found soldiers. Then they cut the letter Z on her chest and ripped her stomach open. Her parents were killed in front of her. 14-year girl was raped by 5 Russian occupiers. She's pregnant now and plans to keep a child. 11-year boy was raped in front of his mother. She was tied to a chair to watch. And outside, it's 21st century. There are other documented by UN human rights violations in Ukraine, include evidence of sexual violence, torture, and killing. Please, talk to your counterparts in your parliaments. Talk to your governments. It's crucial to give full-scale support to Ukraine, because the aggressor will not stop until he is stopped, but by us united. And today, the synonym of freedom is Ukraine. And in order for freedom not to lose, it must be well-armed and supported. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bilodzian. I give now the floor to Mr. Kuleman-Brenner from Hungary.
Dankeschön, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. My first few words go to the people in Ukraine. They're suffering, and I'd like to express a deep sense of solidarity with them. Several 100,000 people who fled Ukraine have found refuge in my country, so that's a form of solidarity that we are showing. I think the wheel of history seems to be rushing ahead. And I think in times such as these, it is clear how important the Council of Europe is. This is an excellent report. There are many details in the report that I think we will need to discuss, but I think it does show how important it has been in these decades of peace to work on what are truly European values: human rights, the rule of law, and the danger for freedom and democracy, the dangers that are always present. And I think every generation has to stand up for freedom and prosperity. I think history has shown us that. And today, in a very brutal way, brutal fashion, we, the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe, have lived under not only a Nazi dictatorship, but a communist dictatorship. And I think we know only too well how that kind of regime can emerge. And I agree with the previous speaker. I think in the last 15 years,
we can see the path on which Putin's Russia has trodden out. I think we should all have seen the signs. I think the signs were there for us all to see. I think if we have any degree of sort of self-criticism, and I think as far as Hungary is concerned, it is particularly important to say that the rule of law, checks and balances, a balanced media landscape are important. It's because of the absence of these things that there's been such brainwashing of the Russian public opinion. And I think that shows exactly how important these values are, values that we need to hold high together here in this assembly. And I think it is important that we point the finger at similarly authoritarian tendencies or movements. It's only in that way that our assembly can sort of steady its ranks, stand shoulder to shoulder. I think this war of aggression by Putin's Russia has led to a greater sense of union or unity on the part of NATO and the European Union. But this is an important organization here when it comes to ensuring freedom and prosperity for peoples in Europe. So I support the report and I appeal to you all to support it.
I give now the floor to Darko Kajewski from North Macedonia.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear guests, dear colleagues, we stand in solidarity with Ukraine, with the people who are aggressively attacked, people who flee the country and desperately seek shelter, people who live without access to water, food, and basic supplies. We decided and we choose the only rightful side. We must act now, because the war in Ukraine is a huge threat to Europe and world security and should stop immediately. Our country's accession to NATO is a strong indicator of the value of the open door policy as a fundamental principle, and we strongly believe that all countries have autonomy and right to choose their own path. North Macedonia has joined EU efforts and is fully in line with the EU common foreign and security policy, imposing a substantial package of sanctions against Russia, and will continue to do so in these days ahead. Now is the time to make the most of the potential of the regional cooperation, of all the partnership tools and mechanisms available in the region. The Balkans have European perspective, and we also have to be sure that European perspectives for the Western Balkans is the same. North Macedonia's place is in the European Union, and being outside in these hard times has multiple negative tendencies for malicious third-party influence, raising suspicions by fabricating news, spreading hate speech, producing disinformation that undermine the citizens' trust in the EU. Now is the perfect time to urgently speed up the process of opening accession talks for North Macedonia, as the EU enlargement with the Western Balkans is seen as a security issue crucial to the stability and prosperity of the region and Europe. Once again, we condemn Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. We fully respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and as allies we give all our support to all of the Ukrainians, and we should open our doors to the Ukrainian people who fled their country and who overnight become refugees. We should give Ukrainians easy access to jobs in our countries, shelter, and ensure their livelihood. We must take responsibility in our everyday lives, in the policies we create, in the decisions we make, and we must promise once and for all the phrases "never again" will be true this time. We are accountable, and we must ensure that the future generations won't live in a war-torn world. Everything we do must contribute to peace and prosperity. We must create a world in which future generations will not experience war in their lifetime ever again. We stand with Larissa, Maria, Alexei, Olena. We stand with all Ukrainians. We stand with Ukraine. Slava Ukraina!
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Solt Cengiz-Alan from Hungary.
Which one? This one? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the floor, Madam President, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to congratulate to Mr. Schwab for this excellent report. The Council of Europe was the first international organization to take a rapid action regarding the aggression of the Russian Federation in Ukraine already on 25th of February. These actions and the measures taken since reflect the united message of the Parliamentary Assembly and the Committee of Ministers. Near the sanctions and efforts for peace, we face other issues as well. Since the exclusion of the Russian Federation of 16th of March, a number of international legal and financial issues have arisen in the organization in clarifying the consequences. For the time being, the process in the Committee of Ministers has begun with the identification of legal issues. Tasks include, for example, clarifying issues related to Russia's participation in Council of Europe's conventions open to non-member countries, or the identification of the budgetary and program implications for the years 22-23. They also concern the definition of the future relation with civil society in Russia and Belarus, or possible changes in the composition and task of the intergovernmental committees in the field of education, culture, youth, and so on. In addition to these urgent issues, the organization will have to focus now on how its strategic priorities can be sustained and how its 4-year program can be adapted to the current circumstances. It is more important than ever for the Council of Europe to reinforce its actions in the field. It means through its action plans, field offices, advisory bodies, and monitoring mechanisms. The actions of the Council of Europe in the Western Balkans and the EU candidate countries have to be reinforced to show a clear European perspective for these countries and assist the European integration process in an effective manner. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Morten Wold from Norway. You have the floor. It's up to you.
Madam President, the ongoing war of aggression which Russia is waging on Ukraine is frightening. Who could possibly have imagined that there would be a conventional war of aggression in Europe in 2022? The footage being relayed on TV screens in Norway is heartrending. Norwegians are in shock at what our Russian neighbor has been doing to the Ukrainian people. I have no problem in saying that I share and support my parliamentary colleagues' condemnation of President Putin. This is something Norway has been unequivocal about. We, the Council, must be absolutely clear that Mr. Putin himself is solely and completely responsible for this war and for the resulting economic sanctions that very many countries have imposed on Russia. I've already said that Russia is one of Norway's neighbors. For many years, we have worked on building trust between Norwegians and Russians. We have had complex and demanding negotiations on the demarcation line in the Barents Sea, but this was solved to the satisfaction of both countries. There have been close ties between Norwegians and Russians in the border communities in northern Norway. There is no escaping the fact that positive developments between our two countries have been set many years back, and it will take just as long to rebuild them if this is ever possible. Norway and many Council member nations has given humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Norway
Yeah.
It is no sabotage, Martin, so...
Norway has also sent military aid, 4,000 M72 anti-armor weapons, several types of protective and other military equipment relatively quickly. And very recently we have provided 100 anti-aircraft missiles with a range of 6 kilometers, suitable for launching from vehicle ships and helicopters, and which could be deployed against relatively low-flying aircraft and helicopters. And we are going to give more support, something our Prime Minister confirmed in Parliament last Wednesday. We should also underline that President Putin's aggression has drawn Western democracies even closer together. Never before has Europe and NATO been stronger or more united. I fully understand why Sweden and Finland are now considering NATO membership, something Norway views as a very positive step. One day this war will end, Mr. President. It is essential that Western democracies act together and remain united, also in this Council, even after the fighting has stopped. We are stronger together. In fact, strength is itself a deterrent. Whatever the result of this senseless war, Russia will be the ultimate loser. Even if they win the fighting, which I really don't hope, they will forever be the losers of the peace.
Thank you very much, Martin. And in time, in spite of the disruption of your microphone. Prochain orateur dans le...
Our next speaker is Mr. Jacques Lenay from France. You have the floor. Thank you, President. Colleagues, we can only be horrified and worried at the way events have developed since the aggression launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. We are horrified by images of destruction and the atrocities that we see, and worried at the rhetoric which the Russian government is using. It is now talking openly about the risk of another world war, having tested new types of weapons, perhaps to try to seek to cause people to forget the real difficulties that the army has faced on the ground. The outbreak of this war is a real challenge for Ukraine. Ukraine is going to have to continue to fight to cover its territorial integrity and will then have to reconstruct. This is also a challenge for Europe. Europe has been shaken by this attack and by the refugee crisis which has resulted. This is the return of a gulf, an open gulf in the European continent, and with reactivation at a level which we could not have considered possible just recently of NATO. And it's a challenge for the whole world because we have seen an attack by a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, which has nuclear weapons, against the background of strategic rivalry with the United States, and this is fraught with threats. Nor can we turn a blind eye to the food crisis that will result for countries in Africa and the Middle East, because the Russian Federation and Ukraine are important wheat and fertilizer producers. And this will undoubtedly lead to huge migratory flows which will place Europe under tension. This major crisis caused by Russia has forced our states out of a form of naivety and has forced us to address our dependencies and forced us to rearm. It is certainly necessary to take this path, given this great threat, but we must do this at the same time as we think very carefully about what it means to belong here in the Council of Europe today. What is the meaning of our democratic values, and how can we protect them, how can we give life to them, and how can we ensure that they prosper? As our rapporteur has said, I think that it is important for the member states of this organisation bring pressure to bear on the Russian Federation to put an end to this war and to return Ukraine to within its international borders, although I imagine that we're in for a long process here. I'd like to express the wish that this Assembly should do everything within its power over the next few months to contribute to this vital thought process on the promotion of democracy in Europe and the multilateral architecture on our continent. But we must also press this organisation to intervene as dynamically and as effectively as possible within the context of its mandate. Thank you.
Merci à vous.
Thank you.
The debate will be Madam Serap Yassar from Turkey. Serap, you have the floor.
Bonjour. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, colleagues. I think one of the important aspects of this war that we are witnessing relate to humanitarian consequences. I think we're seeing a major upheaval, one of the most important since the Second World War, with many being displaced. And I think this is a first. We've seen some 5 million Ukrainians fleeing, half of whom are children, and they have become refugees, according to the position of a certain number of international organizations such as UNICEF and the UN. Now, these children are, without any doubt, the most vulnerable group in the context of migratory movements, but that was true also of Syria and Afghanistan, where we've seen the disappearance of very many migrant children or children who are separated from their families. I'd also like to draw your attention to the dangers to which they're exposed along the migratory routes. We have made a certain number of press declarations within our parliament raising questions as to the scale of the dangers to which these children are exposed. We need to investigate the fate of children who have disappeared. And we have addressed letters to embassies of the 46 member states of the Council of Europe and international organizations calling for support with a view to preventing the disappearance of children. And with this letter, we have sent photographs of migrant children who it is alleged to have disappeared. The international community needs to do that all that is required. We should be mindful of the best interest of children to avoid the disappearance of refugee and migrant children, and particular attention needs to be paid to unaccompanied minors. They represent one of the most urgent problems. I think we need to identify them rapidly, these unaccompanied minors, and provide them with immediate assistance on their arrival in our countries. They should also benefit from other forms of support. I think it is important that these questions be discussed in depth within the Parliamentary Assembly. Within the Council of Europe, we have at our disposal the necessary tools and resources with a view to tackling this important issue. Thank you.
Merci à vous, Serap.
Thank you. Our next speaker and the last speaker this morning will be Mr. Pierre-Alain Frides on behalf of from Switzerland. Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Frank Schwaber for his important report. This covers most of the political, economic, and social and humanitarian consequences of this conflict, which has changed the reality of Europe for a long time ahead. As rapporteur for the relevant commission, I am going to be going with Ukraine and will be accompanied by colleagues from a number of countries. Ukraine has been devastated by atrocities, and we are going to try to do everything to improve the fate of victims and to help the Ukrainians who are faced with all these difficulties, fear, destruction, and the fact that Ukraine has been a victim of this aggression means that we must make sure that we are up to the task. We must provide food and basic stuffs. We have the obligation to do this because we are European countries. We're talking about defending and upholding the fundamental values of this continent, a democratic continent. The consequences of the war will move far beyond the borders of Ukraine. I have spoken to my Moldovan colleagues talking about the risks of the destabilization of Moldova, given what is happening in Odessa, where it is not clear what is going to happen. It is clear that Transnistria could be an objective of Russia, and this could lead to all kinds of pseudo-scenarios of freeing an oppressed people. We've seen what's happened in Tiraspol just in the last couple of days. These are explosions which are accompanied by menacing words. Transnistria could become a real focus for Russia in this regard. And this could lead to further destabilization of Moldova, which is a neutral but fragile country and historically divided between two worlds. As José Durieux has underlined, there are economic difficulties too as a result of this conflict. High inflation, social difficulties could arise. And we should remember the huge contribution that Moldova is making to Ukrainian refugees. This means that we must do everything we can to reinforce stability, providing financial and other assistance. We must provide a clear support for Ukraine, which wishes to be freer, more European, and wishes to have greater security and less corruption. I spoke about Moldova, and more than ever, Ukraine must be our absolute priority with our absolute support. Thank you for your attention.
Merci à vous, Pierre Alain.
Thank you very much, Pierre Alain.
The list of speakers. I remind members that the debate will resume at 3:30 p.m. this afternoon, where we will hear further speeches, the replies to the debate, and consider the amendments. We are now going to welcome the President of the Republic of Italy, and we wait for a few seconds to have him here with us in the hemicycle.
Son Excellence, le Président de la République.
His Excellency, the President of the Italian Republic.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's now my great honor to welcome to this chamber His Excellency, the President of the Italian Republic, Mr. Sergio Mattarella. Dear President, welcome to what we consider as an agora of European parliamentary dialogue and multilateral diplomacy. We are extremely honored and happy that you have joined us today, and we are present at a time where your country, Italy, is chairing our Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers. I'm also glad that you are accompanied by your Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Di Maio, and your ambassador, who take care very well for the chairmanship of the Republic of Italy of the Committee of Ministers. Great that we have you here as well, Mr. Minister and Mr. Ambassador. Mr. President, the commitment of your country to the values of peace and democracy is essential for deepening our cooperation within the Council of Europe, especially in these very difficult times, when we see that peace and democratic stability, all the values that we sometimes did take too easily for granted on the European soil, are fundamentally undermined as a result of Russia's war of aggression against our member state, Ukraine. Your presence here, Mr. President, is highly appreciated by all of us and demonstrates the dedication of your country, a founder member of our organization, to human rights, democracy and the rule of law. At a time, Mr. President, when these values of our organization are violated by Russian aggression against our fellow Ukrainians, your personal support in attaining the maintenance of our common goal, a united and peaceful Europe, contributes to the reinforcement of the Council of Europe's principles and values. These are the moments that we need. We all need courage and we all need wisdom. And if you have an age of 81, some people think that wisdom comes with the years, but as you told me earlier, it has to be proven time and again. And let me say you, if some of you think the President is already 81, it is clear that the President thinks I'm only 81. So be aware, he is with us full-fledged. You have had such a considerable political and legal experience, Mr. President. You were a long-standing member of your parliament. You were a judge to the Constitutional Court of Italy. You were a minister. And you have so many qualities that it's a great honor to have you here and get some wisdom from you. We are really looking forward with great interest to your intervention and then afterwards the exchange of views with members. Mr. President, thank you again for being with us. May I invite you to the floor. Thank you very much.
Signor Presidente dell'Assemblea.
President of the Parliamentary Assembly, Madam Secretary General of the Council of Europe, members of the Parliamentary Assembly, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to be able to address this assembly, an assembly that is the broadest expression of the sentiments of the will of the peoples of Europe. And I am particularly satisfied that my first official visit since the Italian Parliament and the representatives of the regions decided to confer upon me the office of President of the Italian Republic once again. As I say, it is a particular satisfaction that my first official visit is to Strasbourg, the seat of very many of Europe's institutions. I would like to pay tribute to the Council of Europe, to its institutions and to you, who are the expression of the parliaments of 46 member states, representing, as you do, 700 million citizens in Europe. I would like to pay particular thanks to President Tini Cox for this opportunity that I have been afforded. I'd like to thank him for his very kind words, and I'd like to thank you all for your welcome. I would like to convey very warm wishes to Secretary General Maria Pejcinovic-Buric. I would like to thank her for her valued leadership of this organization, something that I had occasion to say to her when we met last November at the Quirinal, and I was able to reiterate those sentiments when we met this morning. The Council of Europe's vocation has always been to be Europe's common home or common house, and the Council of Europe has been able to extend and consolidate that over the decades that followed its inception, as can be seen by its very broad degree of representativity. A common home or house that has been a faithful mirror of the divisions and the difficulties that have emerged between various national communities, but a common home or house that's also been the expression of courage, European unity that has often anticipated what has been achieved in other formats and in other fora, such as the European Union. The Council of Europe has been able to push out the boundaries of our civilization. One thinks of the abolition of the death penalty, for example, the fight against racism, efforts to support freedom of expression, the defense of cultural diversity, the protection of the rights of children, and the development of policies for young people. To paraphrase perhaps the Miller of Potsdam, on our continent we can say there is a judge in Strasbourg. Given the activities developed by the European Court of Human Rights, the fruit of the European Human Rights Convention, which was of course signed in Rome. The Council of Europe, in other words, has been able to consolidate the rights of individuals, of citizens, adding to the defence afforded by domestic legal orders that which derives from the application of the Convention in cases of violation of individuals' rights by states. Because there is no reason of state that can be used to justify the violation of individual rights. Freer then, safer, more cohesive, and I think there of the European Social Charter, with its many provisions against inequality and poverty, a charter that was adopted in Italy, in Turin in 1961. These are unequaled, unparalleled results and testify to tenacious efforts to build a common home, a common house here within the Council of Europe. Progress then for hundreds of millions of citizens in Europe, proud to feel that they are part of one single demos. The Council of Europe is the child of a push, an impetus towards multilateralism that characterized the years that followed the Second World War, together with the UN system. A push or an impetus based on a very elementary consideration. Cooperation can reduce opposing forces, can reduce conflict and increase possibilities for positive dispute resolution. It wasn't, of course, easy to tread out on the path of reconciliation, as it wasn't easy to achieve a situation where we feel we share a common heritage, to have the courage to go from the law of force to the force of law. Building a lasting peace has been a slow and gradual process that enabled us to avoid the risk of a Third World War that we came close to with the war in Korea and the Berlin blockade. A process that many years ago involved things such as agreement on the neutrality clause in respect of Austria and the resolution to the Cuban crisis. But just as war claims a lightning victory, although it fails in that, so peace is the fruit of patient and unstoppable outflow of both the spirit and practice of cooperation between peoples, of an ability to move from confrontation and an arms race to dialogue, and to the controlled and balanced reduction of arms of aggression. It is a painstaking process or construction made up of coherent and continuous choices and acts, not an isolated act, the fruit of obstinate or obdurate faith in humanity and a sense of responsibility towards that humanity. As Robert Schuman reminded us, peace can only be safeguarded through creative forces or efforts that are proportionate to the dangers that threaten it. If we pursue common objectives in order to win, it's no longer necessary for someone to lose, because we all win together. This example of the Council of Europe, I think, has been contagious, so much so that Strasbourg was the must-go-to place for all those who aspire to freedom and independence, with a view to strengthening and consolidating that independence and freedom. And that has been the case of very many countries. But of course, in order to stay together, you have to live by the common rules that you have adopted. And that was the justification for the Greek parenthesis after the military coup d'etat. Decades later, the Central European countries, the Baltic countries, and the Caucasus were able to choose in turn to become members of the Council of Europe, and through that decision to stand up in support of the protection of human rights, the rule of law, and the development of democracy. As the president of the Italian Republic, Sandro Pertini, said, speaking before this very assembly exactly 39 years ago, on the 27th of April 1983, one has to be able to muster the courage which is that of renunciation when the departure of a country, member of the Council of Europe, appears necessary if we're not to betray the inspiration that has given life to this institution. Hitler's aim, one that led to the Second World War, was to make Germany the leading power, the dominant power, dominating other peoples and countries. And it was a design that involved the regimes of many countries, including the Kingdom of Italy. But it was beaten by an international civil conscience. But as the history books remind us, stability and peace cannot be guaranteed once and for all time. I think one only has to look at the dramatic and sad development in the Balkans, the Caucasus, or the Black Sea. Peace is not something that can be imposed or that comes about of its own motion. No, it is the fruit of the will of men and women. Today, once again, we are living through a nightmare, unexpected as it was unforeseeable, the nightmare of a war on our continent. We are witnessing attempts to turn back history to the era of power politics, of some trying to subjugate others, of a confrontation between peoples, very often disguised as defense of national interest. Imperialism, neocolonialism have no right to exist in the third millennium, in whatever guise they may appear. However they may be dressed up. Gone are the days of a late 19th century vision and then Stalinist vision, imagining a hierarchy between nations to the advantage of the militarily stronger. We no longer live in an age where countries can claim or attempt to dominate others. We made our choice some time ago with international relations, or the passage rather of international relations divorced from any legal consideration, bringing those international relations within the ambit of law as a civilizing force. Given the Europe which is that of war, there can be no ambiguity, no uncertainty. The Russian Federation, with its terrible invasion of Ukraine, has chosen to place itself outside the rules to which it had freely signed up and that it contributed to apply. The decision of this Parliamentary Assembly and of the Council of Europe to take note of what has happened, I think, is consistent with the values on which the status or the statute of this organisation is based, which talks of a closer union in terms of the shared aspirations of the peoples of Europe. The responsibility for these sanctions adopted fall fairly and squarely on the government of the Russian Federation. But I would add, not on the Russian people, whose culture is very much a part of Europe's heritage and who are being kept culpably in the dark in terms of what is really going on in Ukraine. There is no turning back from the trenches in terms of the defense of human rights and the rights of peoples. We're talking about principles that have been embodied in the history of the second half of the 20th century, in which a fortiori we need to consolidate today. The determined and active solidarity with the Ukrainian people and the appeal to the government of the Russian Federation to stop, to withdraw its troops, and to contribute to rebuilding a country that it has devastated. All these calls flow from these elementary considerations. The international community has a responsibility. We need to obtain a ceasefire and start thinking in terms of a respectful, shared international framework that will enable us to reach peace. An intellectual, Paul Valéry, who lived through the two world wars, reminded European fellow citizens that we live in a finite world. There is no unoccupied land. There's no part of the globe that still has to be explored. So if no one is anyone's foreigner or stranger anymore, as President Pertini has said, has time not come for men and women to learn to live in peace one with another?
And we could add, in an ever more interconnected world, in which essentially geographical distances have become irrelevant, in which all of us can communicate with each other, and we often do in real time. We speak to people throughout the world. There is no longer any room for the anachronism of speaking of spheres of influence. The current international context would appear to be riddled with contradictions, not least given the Russian Federation itself, which has violated all the main charters which have been defined in the multilateral world, and yet which paradoxically is seeking to apprise the World Trade Organization against the sanctions that have been imposed by the international community. This conflict has further weakened the international system of shared rules, and the world, as a consequence, has become much more unsafe. But the way out is undeniably only via cooperation and recourse to multilateral institutions. This seems to be the conclusion that has been reached by countries which have so far refused to recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. But today, they're calling for its appraisal so that investigations can take place against those who are responsible for crimes, undeniable and appalling crimes against humanity, such as those that have been committed by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Thus, these countries are recognizing, essentially, the necessary role of the ICC. The voice of the United Nations has been clear in condemning and denouncing the situation, but sadly has not been effective on the grounds. But this means that the action of the United Nations must be reinforced, not weakened. Initiatives such as that of Liechtenstein and 15 other countries to avoid the paralysis of the United Nations Security Council are matters that must be given serious consideration. The war is a voracious monster. It is never sated, and the temptation to increase the number of conflicts follows from Moscow's bellicose enterprise. The devastation to the international community's rules could spread its effects if we prove unable to stop this choice being taken. We must curb this danger. We must prevent there from being further conflicts as a result, because experience tells us that it is then difficult to contain such conflicts. We must meet all of this with a decisive will in favor of peace, and otherwise we will be undermined by it. And just for a moment, let us seek, by borrowing words from the so-called Cold War, let us seek to find the words, to use words which have fallen into disuse in order to see whether we can find a way forward, however difficult it is. Détente, putting an end to hostilities, the refusal of war in order to come back to the status quo ante, peaceful coexistence between peoples and states, democracy, as the precious work of the Venice Commission teaches us. This is a precondition for the respect of the dignity of each and every one of us. And finally, Helsinki and not Yalta. We want dialogue, not a power struggle between great powers, which must now understand that they are ever less great. We must identify an international body which is capable of putting out roots into the roots of peace, which restores dignity to a framework for cooperation and security on the example of the Helsinki Conference in 1975, which led to the final act, which was rich in positive developments. And the result of that was the establishment of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. We must seek firmly to assert our refusal of policy based on spheres of influence, on rights trampled for some people and some countries. No, we must proclaim, in the spirit of Helsinki, the equality of rights of all, the equality for all peoples and all individuals. We need a new architecture for international relations in Europe and in the world as a whole, a shared architecture, an inclusive one, without prejudicial positions of privilege. Security and peace. These are the great lessons of the Second World War. But this cannot be left to bilateral relations, Moscow versus Kiev, especially when these relations are unequal between bigger states and smaller states. Guaranteeing security and peace is the responsibility of the entire international community, and we must make sure that this happens. And this must be the guarantor of a new peace. As I move towards my conclusion, I would like to underline that the opportunity to come here today and to speak to you in person underlines how important it is for us to be able to communicate directly. It is undoubtedly a good thing that I've been able to be here in person. We have been through a very difficult phase because of the pandemic. We have witnessed dreadful moments. The virus has not yet been overcome, but we have learned to combat it and to deal with its effects. In this hall, I would like to pay homage to all of those who, often at great personal expense and sometimes even at the expense of their lives, have contributed to the results that we are able to enjoy today. I'm thinking, above all, of medical staff. They deserve our total gratitude. I'm thinking of researchers and scientists, but also all the agents, volunteers and professionals who, in their various different capacities, have enabled us to overcome this challenge. Once again, we have seen the value of international cooperation. The international scientific cooperation has worked beyond borders, has exchanged data, has shared the results of its experience and research progress. We could hardly have a better reminder, and we hoped that this example of cooperation against a common enemy of humanity would be grasped by the governments of our states and would push us to greater dialogue, to sharing and cooperation. Nor must we forget that although today we might hope that the worst is behind us, this is largely thanks to the conduct of our citizens and their sense of responsibility and the fact that they went along with measures in order to mitigate the spread of the virus and to guarantee the success of the vaccine campaign. Without their contribution, it would have been able to overcome COVID-19 and to overcome the pernicious virus of misinformation and mistrust in science. Our institutions have demonstrated that they are able to react rapidly, and our societies have demonstrated reassuring resilience. I would like to say how much I appreciate the contribution of the member states of the Council of Europe, ensuring that the response to the pandemic has been able to take place in keeping with upholding human rights and fundamental freedoms, placing the human person at the centre of our focus and our irrepressible dignity. This aspect should never be taken for granted. It is a European success of which we can be justifiably proud. Ladies and gentlemen, the Italian Republic contributed with conviction to the birth of this, our organization, its growth and its full blossoming as a vital focus of the multilateral system for the protection of freedom and an assertion of the principles of the rule of law. This is a function which the organization continues to play, and all the bodies of the Council of Europe, its member states, are called upon to pursue this precious work. This we have been able to repeat in a spirit of responsibility, we Italians, as part of our 8th presidency of the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers. The generation of the founders managed, on the basis of material, moral and legal ruin, managed to build a multilateral community and a forward-focusing one. And we hope that we have faithfully been able to conserve this heritage and have defended it as a precious asset. This task is not finished, and therefore it is for us to take up today's challenges and to develop on this.
Auguri, buon lavoro quindi a tutti noi e grazie dell'attenzione.
Mr. President, Mr. President, thank you for your words of wisdom. I told you when we met before that I would expect that many members would come here in the hemicycle or online to listen to your words of wisdom. I can tell you that you have gathered a record number of members listening to you, and the applause at least shows that we do see some wisdom in your words. Thank you very much for that. But as you know, you have been a parliamentarian yourself for such a long time. We always have questions. We are parliamentarians. We have to ask questions. And you kindly agreed to answer the questions. So I will first give the floor now to the 5 representatives of the political groups, and you will answer these questions each and every one. And then we will take the remaining questions, and I will bring 3 of them together, and then you have the chance to respond to these questions. So first in this round, I call the president of the group of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats, Frank Schwabe from Germany, to ask the first question. And questions have to be limited to 1 minute or less.
Thank you very much, caro signor Presidente, for that you are here with us and for your important speech, especially in these challenging times. Considering the threats of new dividing lines and all challenges Europe is facing for its security, its values, the protection of human rights, international law, and the impact these have on our organization, we as the Socialist Democrats and Greens groups consider that a 4th summit of heads of state and government of Council of Europe member states is critical to celebrate a new vision to our organization and should be organized as soon as possible. And I think I speak in the name of the whole Parliamentary Assembly, and you spoke about a new architecture for Europe as well. I know it's in the competence of the government, but since we have you here as the highest representative of your country, I would like to ask you about your ideas and if you think such a 1st summit is sensible, when it could be, and what could be the issues, the main issues on such a summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Mr. President.
La ringrazio, ma
Thank you very much indeed. The behavior of the Russian Federation with this tragic, unforeseeable aggression of Ukraine has has led to the expulsion of the Russian Federation from the Council of Europe. And I think we do require strategic thinking when it comes to the future and the objectives to be pursued by this organization, with a view to ensuring the effectiveness that has always been a hallmark of the role of the Council of Europe in past decades. I think it's important to recall the words of heads of state and government on the occasion of another summit, the first one that took place in '93 in Vienna. And perhaps I can read out words of the communication. Europe is a force of great hope that should under no circumstances be destroyed by territorial ambition or the rebirth of aggressive nationalism or the continuation of spheres of influence, intolerance or totalitarian ideologies. One could have written those words today. I think it gives some idea of how important the present times are, and how important a summit would be of those heads of state of the countries making up the Council of Europe. I know that in May there's going to be an important ministerial meeting in Italy, in Turin, and that, I think, will be an opportunity for us to reflect on what response to be given to this issue. I believe very much in the need for a solemn context when it comes to setting the framework for a continuation of the important work which is that being done with the Council of Europe.
Next question comes from Mr. Davor Ivo Stier from Croatia, and he asked his question on behalf of the group of the European People's Party. David, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Signor President.
Mr. President, thank you for your words.
The President is currently facing multiple threats. Of course, the most important and grave one, Putin's war of aggression. But also, we are seeing the challenge posed by authoritarian tendencies around the globe, but also in our area of the Council of Europe. We see also the problem that inflation is causing to European economies and societies. Now, Mr. President, you're a leader that managed to gather very diverse and different forces, political forces in Italy. Based on that record, we would like to ask you, how do you see the role of the Council of Europe in keeping Europe united, in offering a unified and unifying response to all these challenges in the defense, of course, of democracy and the rule of law?
Thank you, Davor. Mr. President.
La ringrazio.
Thank you for your question. Well, this is a very important matter, because Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which has unpredictably brought war back to our continent, means that unity is ever more important. The unity of the countries and people of Europe, the people that believe in peace and democracy and that believe in the rule of law. In the last few decades, in the Council of Europe, and given the cooperation between states, we have developed common ground, a common understanding and trust, and this mustn't be jeopardized in a situation of crisis. We must preserve this system, which is enshrined in the Court and the European Charter of Human Rights, which was built in order to defend these values. This is heritage which is in the European Charter and which is a focus for us. And we must defend this and preserve it, in bearing in mind future generations. The statute of the Council of Europe and the European Union means that we are moving towards ever greater unity between European peoples, a unity in our intentions and our commitments and sharing our values and our modes of life. This is absolutely vital, because it's important for Europe, globally speaking, it is important for Europe to play a role of dialogue, of peace, and values which need to be reasserted in favour of democracy and the rule of law. And therefore, I think that defending these rules, these values, is the one and only path down which we must go in the face of current events. And of course, there are the immediate steps that we need to take to put an end to this conflict, but we must stand against violence and the use of law, and we must promote coexistence and peace. There is no alternative. We must preserve this path, and this is this is what the Council of Europe has done in past decades and must continue to do.
Now, the next question is asked by Mr. John Howell from the United Kingdom, and John speaks on behalf of the European Conservatives. John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellency, welcome. Can I return you to the question of sanctions? As I understand it, currently 7 big Italian companies are continuing business as usual in Russia, and 6 big Italian companies are postponing future planned investment and development whilst continuing their business relationship with Russia. What can Italy do to convincingly encourage these companies to end their business in Russia and to comply with sanctions?
Thank you, John. Mr. President.
Le rispondo molto volentieri.
Yes, I'm delighted to reply. I mean, the numbers that you've referred to obviously will have to be verified. But in the meantime, the sanctions regime is fully operational, and we're applying it with great rigor. It is a decision that has been supported by the Italian government in terms of companies that have their headquarters in Italy. A number of enterprises have suspended their activities in the Russian Federation on the basis of the sort of principles, market economy, principles of the rule of law. We are applying or living by those rules, as is the case in other countries that have signed up to the rules which relate to the free market. The Italian Republic is applying these sanctions regimes with rigour and is prepared to sign up to further sanctions. That is a very clear position and should be clear to all.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The next question comes from Mr. Damien Cotier from Switzerland, and he asks his question on behalf of the group of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe. Damien, vous avez la parole.
You have the floor. Yes, I come from Switzerland, where Italian is also a national language. I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for being here today to speak to us in Strasbourg. Dialogue between this Assembly and the Committee of Ministers is a very important factor in our work. But I would like to take on what Mrs. Stier and Schwabe have said. We have seen that there has been this turning point in Europe, this break in history, which is almost made possibly as great as 1989, given the attack against Ukraine. And we need to rethink the Council of Europe. And you have pointed out that you support that there should be a fourth summit, which the Assembly wishes to see. And I would like to know, in that context, how Italy is going tangibly in the Council of Ministers at the moment in Turin is going to seek to organise this summit. What kind of ideas are you going to bring forth in order to make sure that the Council of Europe is even better able to defend its values?
Yeah.
Thank you, Damien. Mr. President, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Well, what has happened simply gives us greater determination to pursue the mission of the Council of Europe, to build a pan-European area based on shared values, based on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And the desire and the ambition to build a common European home is ever greater. And this is especially given that this has been jeopardized by what has happened with the Russian attack against Ukraine, and therefore the importance of the role of the Council of Europe must be ever more reasserted, and this determination that the European people undoubtedly embody for their future. Every initiative, therefore, must mean that we define together, and I think that the summit of heads of state and government would be a good opportunity to define a framework for the updating the way that we think of the Council of Europe to make sure that it is more broader and more inclusive as an organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And the last question on behalf of the political groups comes from Mr. Marco Nicolini from San Marino on behalf of the group of the Unified European Left. Marco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll speak in Italian for the first time in this Parliament. Signor Presidente.
President, I recall a historic event when I was elected head of state of the Republic of San Marino, because I was invited to Quirinal for an official visit. It was a unique occasion, and it's thanks to that that the San Marino Republic likes to refer to you as a friend. But I would like to ask you to turn your gaze to small states in Europe. The Republic of San Marino emerged as an attempt to ward off an external oligarchy that attempted to get its hands on the country, with rather strange procedures being put in place where individuals occupied seats in important international forum. So I think we are certainly aware of what's meant by vulnerability. But I'd like to ask you, President, what's your feeling on the negotiations now running into their 7th year, involving 3 micro-states attempting to achieve an association agreement with the European Union at a time of great difficulty with the war on the a backdoor step, I think an important signal could be set when it comes to the possibility of these three microstates joining this association agreement.
Mr. President.
Signor Presidente, ricordo anch'io la visita.
Well, President, I certainly recall President Niccolini's visit to the Quirinal. It was an opportunity to reiterate the great friendship that unites our two countries. For a number of years, I know San Marino, the Principality of Monaco, and Andorra are calling for an association agreement with the European Union. It is a request that has the full support of Italy. We convincingly would support such a request. We have always done that in the past, and we will continue to do that. It would make an important contribution, independence and freedom on the part of these three microstates, an important contribution to the EU, three small countries that have managed to shore up their position, but Italy will continue to give its support to the calls for associate membership of the EU for these three microstates in question.
Groupings of three questions, after which you get the floor to react. First question, première question.
The first question we will hear from Mr. Bernard Fournier from France. Mr. President, as part of your presidency of the Committee of Ministers, Italy has particularly stressed taking into account the human person and the inter-religious dialogue. On the 2nd of May in Strasbourg, we will have an inter-religious dialogue on religion and peace and religion and human rights. Please could you tell us what you expect of this event and what your vision is of the possible benefits of such an inter-religious dialogue in Europe and a world which needs to draw upon humanist values. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Madam Katalin Söber from Hungary. Katalin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mr. Mattarella, what do you think of the United for Peace initiative, Unite U24, which has been proposed by Ukraine, and the possible participation of Italy as a guarantor state? Thank you.
Merci à vous.
Thank you very much. And the third question will be put by Ms. Adamarra from Switzerland. Thank you very much, President. Mr. President, good morning. I would like to use Italian because I am the daughter of Italian migrants. Now, for you, for me, and for many others, you represent the upholding of institutions in order to promote equality and common prosperity. And this is why we are here in the Council of Europe. Now, there is a phenomenon which doesn't respect this, and which is, I'm talking about the mafia. I'd like to, and we know that there in the international ramifications of the mafia, which we seek to not to see or turn a blind eye to. I would like to know what you think about international cooperation to counter this phenomenon, and whether states are doing enough to counter the mafia, and what could be done if not enough is being done. And my apologies if my Italian is not perfect.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Three quite diverse questions. Could you please try to react?
Yes, with pleasure. Firstly, the interreligious dialogue, in our view, this is vital for coexistence and peace. There are significant events which have demonstrated this. Let me mention a couple of, for instance, the Pope Francesco and other heads of churches have invited their people to interreligious events in order to promote interreligious dialogue. And the two leaders involved have done so much work, and it has been particularly important. I'm thinking also of Constantinople and the Anglican primate, Archbishop Wellesley, and other important leaders. All the religious leaders have sought to come together, and they have to bring all the faithful to focus on the fate of humanity. And this is why the interreligious dialogue is so important. It is vital for the promotion of human values and the personal dignity of all of us, whatever a person's religion or lack of religion. Now, an interreligious dialogue is absolutely vital because it counters fundamentalism, and it encourages all of us to see ourselves as members of the human race and as part of the human condition. And Italy, in this regard, has the clear separation between the state and religions, but we recognize religious festivals, and we note the contribution that they make to civil society over and above the contribution of the religious beliefs themselves. And this is a contribution to mutual respect, putting religions together and understanding the importance of each other. The second question now. We are convinced that we must support and encourage all efforts to negotiate that are ongoing, even though there may be not a lot of optimism, but there must be every opportunity must be taken to ensure that some kind of a negotiation can take place. All of these efforts must be encouraged, and this hasn't yet happened, but because the Russian Federation has not taken up the opportunity to negotiate. But we defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And against this background, we have offered to be a guarantor state for Ukraine as part of an international framework which would provide a framework for the future of Ukraine. And let us hope that we can move towards this kind of result. I would now like to reply to the third question. What you have underlined is absolutely vital: international cooperation to counter organised crime. This is the vision of someone who gave their lives from this point of view, a protagonist of the campaign against the mafia, whom I knew very, very well. I'm thinking of Giovanni Falcone, and it was 30 years ago that he was assassinated. I'm convinced that we must cooperate internationally, because this is the way of blocking and defeating the mafia and organised crime, because organised crime has become ever more transnational in nature, and it works on a number of different continents, and it also uses the digital world. And therefore, we need to take appropriate steps, and we must constantly update our efforts to counter organised crime, just as organised crime uses new tools. And we must draw on international cooperation and appropriate tools to counter organised crime. Italia works with a number of countries, a large number of countries, in providing the fruits of its experience, and also becoming involved in investigations. And these are multilateral efforts, and I'm thinking in Interpol C, Count Against the 'Ndrangheta, and this is an organisation which works in Latin America and elsewhere. Cooperation of this kind is the most effective way to counter organised crime, and this is a matter which we must constantly keep within our focus. And just in a few days' time in Palermo, in the city where I come from, where the convention was signed, the international commitment to counter organised crime, there will be a European event, and that will be an opportunity to focus on these topics. And these are matters which we have to focus on constantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now we take 3 more questions. The first comes from your compatriot, Mr. Roberto Rampi. Roberto.
President, thank you. Culture is very important for us. You were Minister of Education many years ago, and as President, I think you have promoted a certain number of cultural rights. We laid out our concerns in a report in 2015. We declared the right to knowledge, and we decided what the pillars of such rights are, investing in education, culture, the quality of parliamentary debate, pluralism. But I'm wondering, given the crisis in democracy, the crisis of culture, the fact that we haven't invested sufficiently in culture, do you not think that this is one of the key areas that we need to be working in currently? Thank you. The cultural dimension is one that is, of course, fundamental. It is fundamental in terms of the foundation for democratic growth, awareness of one's rights, and free and independent information or access to media is, of course, of crucial importance. It is a principle that is enshrined in our constitution in Italy, because it is a fundamental pillar in any democracy. If we are to establish democracy and ensure that our democracies are authentic and can flourish. Cultural rights are important in terms of conscious sense of citizenship, active citizenship. To be able to compare and contrast differing opinions, for example, for ideas to freely circulate. When it comes to upholding a democracy and the rule of law, I think culture really is the fulcrum. It is the starting point. The Council of Europe has devoted much energy and time into guaranteeing such rights. And I'm thinking in particular of the initiative that has to do with the freedom of expression, right of access to information, training of journalists. A certain number of guidelines have been adopted by the Council of Europe when it comes to ensuring transparency of media ownership, for example, or pluralism of the media. All these things are very important, as is the need to fight manipulation through the use of algorithms, in that algorithms are very often used to manipulate public opinion. We're also seeing the spread of fake news. So access to information is important. We cannot curb or curtail in any way the right to freedom of information. Perhaps I can spare a thought for the work of journalists, journalism in Ukraine. We are seeing so much cruelty, but amongst the many deaths, we're seeing the death of journalists who stand up and representing the truth. And I think that illustrates how important it is to defend journalists and the profession that they exercise. The adoption by the Council of Europe of education for democratic citizenship and the defense of human rights, I think, is confirmation of the awareness of how important these issues are on the part of the Council of Europe. And of course, we're seeing the use being made of artificial intelligence in the area of new technologies. And of course, there are some important issues that need to be addressed in terms of defense of human rights.
We now take 3 more questions. First question is online from Madam Nina Kansimati from Greece. Nina, please take the floor. Please ask for the floor again, Nina. We take the next question. Comes from Mr. Joseph O'Reilly from Ireland. Joe, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Welcome, President Mattarella. Given that spiralling inflation fueled by COVID and the war of aggression in Ukraine can threaten democracy and the rule of law, what Europe-wide solutions can be found? How can they be uniformly implemented? And what steps should be taken at a pan-European level to deal with the immediate impact on the most vulnerable in our society? Thank you.
Thank you. Is Nina with us? Yes, Nina, you have the floor. Nina Kansimati from Greece.
She disappeared again.
But Nina disappeared again. These things happen. So we take one more question from Mr. Nikos Tornaderitis from Cyprus. Nikos.
Mr. President, there are countries which have not yet and apparently have no intention of joining collective sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation for its invasion of Ukraine. It so happens that Turkey, for instance, is a member of NATO and then the Council of Europe and a candidate country for European Union membership. Do you believe that the logic of double standards on behalf of the international community vis-à-vis Russia on the one hand and Turkey on the other hand, which feels free not to apply sanctions against Russia for its own benefit, serves peace and does not harm the effectiveness of sanctions and subsequently the purpose for their adoption?
Thank you very much, Nikos. And as we cannot get Nina online, and the third question, before you answer, Mr. President, comes from Madame Nicole Duraton de la France. Nicole?
Nicole Duraton from France. Thank you very much, President. Mr. President of the Republic, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, President Mattarella. On the 7th of April, the European Court of Human Rights convicted Italy for its passivity in an appalling affair of domestic violence, which led to the death of a child of 1 year of age. Domestic violence is unfortunately a scourge which affects all the member states of this organization, and we recognize how difficult it is to combat it. I would like, therefore, to welcome the stress laid by the Italian presidency of the Committee of Ministers on preventing violence against women and on eliminating all forms of violence and abuse against children and teenagers. Mr. President, please could you tell us what your expectations are of the action of the Council of Europe in this area, and in particular the new Council of Europe strategy on the rights of children and teenagers, which was launched on the 7th and 8th of April last in Rome.
Allow me, Mr. President, I would add one more question because it comes from the leader of the Italian delegation in the Parliamentary Assembly, Madam Marta Grande. So then, if you then combine all these questions, then we leave you free, okay, for the lunch. Marta.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. President, the international system which was set up after the war and based on the principles of democratic values, for a number of reasons, is under attack. For years and years, we've seen the building of an architecture which is rooted in the rule of law, upholding human rights, and the diplomatic resolution of conflicts. But we now see a real war in Ukraine. In this regard, it is often said that international institutions need to be reformed to make sure that they're in a better position to respond more appropriately to challenges in the contemporary world. What do you think the reforming role of an institution is, of an organisation such as the Council of Europe? Thank you.
Presidente, io devo anzitutto scusare.
Well, I'd like to apologise because I was supposed to wait for other questions after Mr. Rampi's question, but I jumped in and answered Mr. Rampi's question. So I would like to take this group of questions. These are all very important issues because inflation and the erosion of purchasing power, especially for the most vulnerable in society, is a very serious economic problem. And this is a matter of concern for Europe as a whole. And the pandemic demonstrated very quickly how important this is for all European governments, in fact, all governments of the world. Now, the European Union has been effective in its action. It has been timely in its action. It must be courageous in promoting cooperation to tackle these grave economic difficulties that might be faced by so many of our fellow citizens. And we must find the ways to mitigate the consequences of inflation. The risks which have been caused by the pandemic have now been multiplied by the cost of energy and the war launched by Russia. And this means that it's ever more important for us to address these issues. And we must draw upon all the tools that we have, individual countries, but also in a coordinated way, and in order to provide assistance and take international action. We must also be aware of the fact that in doing this and trying to contain the negative consequences of these events is absolutely vital in order to consolidate our democracies and to make sure that we demonstrate the effectiveness of our democracies in tackling problems in the common interest, in the interests of each member of society. The second question. Italy has already said it is firm in its support for sanctions and naturally hopes that in action to counter Russia, that these sanctions are applied by all, as many as possible, as many countries as possible. Now, of course, there are countries which have taken a particular stance. Some have implemented all the sanctions, some not. But here we are the question of checking to what extent countries are implementing these sanctions. Now, we're talking about promoting a common set of values, and therefore, when we're talking about a pre-candidate country for the European Union, this is an opportunity to check that the candidate is appropriate, and that given the very demanding nature of accession to the European Union, naturally it's important to commit to peace at this particular moment. And as we're doing it, so many countries are doing this, it's important to support, to provide humanitarian support for Ukraine, to provide political support, and also to provide the assistance that they need in order to defend their freedom and their independence. And this, of course, needs to go along with, as I've said, to make sure that everything is done and to make sure that everything is done to achieve peace negotiations. And therefore, we mustn't underestimate every and any initiative which is being taken to achieve negotiations in order to put an end to this conflict. And it is in particular, we must defend the independence, the security, and the full freedom and territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is what we must achieve by our common efforts. Now, on the next question, this is a very important topic, the question of violence against women. And I have addressed this issue on a number of occasions in Italy. Now, the case that you have mentioned needs to be clarified. The court looks at individual cases, and they don't necessarily reflect what is happening generally in the country. And the appalling nature of individual cases doesn't necessarily reflect what is going on more generally in the country. We all feel distressed at this particular case, but Italy has very effective tools to counter domestic violence now, and we are paying great attention to this issue. And the court has recently underlined in a judgment that has underlined the appropriateness of Italy's tools to counter domestic violence, and thinking back to 2008 as well. Since we have been trying to tackle this issue in every possible way, we have a national strategy to counter violence against women, the violence of men against women, and this is something which is constantly renewed. And one of the results is providing support for women who have been the victims of violence from men. And the criminal justice in Italy now has extra tools in order to counter domestic violence and prevent domestic violence, in particular addressing crimes of violence against women. And this also happens at the civil level. That is to say that there are opportunities to protect women and to make sure that appropriate intervention takes place in a timely fashion. This is something which is very much at the focus of our attention. As a member of the Council of Europe, because this is of such a matter of such importance, and this is a matter which Italy has paid great attention to during its presidency of the Council of Europe in order to seek to put an end to violence against women. Now, it's important to make sure that the Istanbul Convention is applied as widely as possible and properly implemented. We must do everything we can to ensure that the Istanbul Convention is implemented fully.
And the question of Madame Grande, the last question.
Sì. Dimenticavo.
Yes, apologies. Apologies for not replying to your question, Mrs. Grande. Well, given the events in Ukraine and given the appalling nature of what has happened, the choice to have Ukraine as a member in 1996, this was a demonstration of the mission of the Council of Europe to uphold shared standards of democracy, and that was the right choice to encourage these opportunities and these prospects. Now, the Russian Federation has not implemented the commitments into which it entered when it joined the Council of Europe. But none of this, of course, means that the Council of Europe's contribution is not necessary. I have tried to stress the results that have been achieved over the decades that the Council of Europe has achieved in various different areas in upholding all kinds of different values, which were simply not upheld decades ago, but which have become priorities for us in so many countries now. And this is thanks to action taken inter alia by the Council of Europe. This is, we've been able to push forward the barriers of civilization. And it's very important for us to have new frameworks, new conventions, new tools at our disposal. And this is the task of the Council of Europe, to counter atrocities and barbarity and to take further steps to defend values by maintaining and developing its role, which is ever more important today on the European continent. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I now have to interrupt the list of speakers. Apologies to those colleagues who were not able to take the floor. May I thank you very much for the wisdom that you brought in the House, Mr. President. Thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure having you here in the hemicycle, and we are looking forward to the Torino conference. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 with the agenda as was approved on Monday. The sitting is adjourned.